We have often talked about how to duplicate members of our team. And I think, Al, you've been realizing more and more when the questions come in for Ask the Pool Guy, how because we have Mark, your focus has been able to change into more of the scope of projects as you do a little bit less with the mechanicals. So what has that been like for you over the last 10, it's been not 8 or 9 years since Mark kind of
pretty much
became a pool guy full time in that way.
While Mark's been around for an awful long time, I would say in the last 10 years, 8 to 10 years, it's done two things. One thing, it certainly freed me up to not have to think about all of those things, all of the little repairs and the things that were happening. And during the opening season, there was always these repairs and things that I was always trying to fit in. While I wasn't part of that crew, I was always trying to fit in those specialty repair things into what I was doing. It's freed me up from that. And that's a real positive. On not necessarily so positive side, what it's done, what I recognize now is how much information I've lost and how much I don't know and how much new technology, because at the same time the technology has quadrupled in 10 years on the pool equipment, pool end of things, I haven't been as engaged with it. I've been specific to what I'm doing, but you've been able to see all of the types of systems that are out there. And while I have 30 some years of experience at this, I would defer to Mark today when it comes to equipment and pool running and maintenance of a pool, because so much has changed in those 10 years. And I know there's still pumps, heaters, and filters, but in terms of how we deal with them, what we do with them, the parts and inventory and those types of things, I'm a duck out of water.
As far as like the automation goes, when you're dealing with technology in general, I mean, a lot of that stuff, I mean, even just, there's a couple of different versions of even just say the Easy Touch and stuff, and you realize what's compatible and what's not. And I mean, because you think about how many times, like, when I've gone through stuff, like I know you've called me a few times, go like, hey, can we still do this with this? It's just a matter, like you said, when you're not around it all the time, it's just something that's not there. But that being said, like, I gotta imagine part of the headache is just the working hours alone, considering we know we can put as much, as we can on the service industry, and if all I'm doing on the service end is just service, and I still work 80 plus hours a week, then the fact that you don't have to do that while at the same time figuring out how you're going to be on the construction end and get everything else done, has to figure, help more than hurt.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that I've lost touch with beyond just my pumps, heaters, and filters, sure. But I get the question oftentimes, what don't you like about this heater? And I don't have much to say, because short of what we've been using because it's been working for us and we've kind of stayed with that, I don't have the knowledge that I once did, that I know you've worked on all of those different heaters and you probably know the ins and outs of most of them. Well, back in the day, the 3 or 4 basic heaters that were there, I could tear them apart inside and out and know what everything was.
Right.
Today, not a chance. It's very different. And I'm thankful that I don't have to worry about that part, but I also realize how not in touch I am sometimes.
So, from each of your approaches, because obviously Mark is very drawn to doing the service because you could choose your own adventure and that seems to be your niche. Why have you been so drawn to it? And can you tell me about something you have learned from Al or his philosophies in your approach? And then once he's finished, the same question for Al will be, what have you learned from watching Mark that's something he does in a uniquely Mark style that you've noticed and appreciated?
Overall, I do prefer service over construction. I mean, I've said it plenty of times. In general, I like fixing things as opposed to building them. I don't like that blank slate. I like coming in and seeing things as a disaster and going, okay, how do we get this working? That's just kind of my personality, what I like to do. But I also like the aspect of I'm on the road a lot of the times where I'm meeting many different types of people. The idea, okay, if I worked a desk job, I would be miserable. And the construction end is not a desk job. However, being on the same site for possibly months on end, you know, depending on what kind of project it is and whatnot, that doesn't appeal to me. Can I do it? Yeah, especially if the job is intriguing enough. But especially those days where we're doing the same thing that we do on every pool and it's the same thing, like to me, it gets pretty monotonous. While the service industry does have a lot of monotony as far as, hey, I might go to 10 different jobs in a day and do the exact same thing because of the change of scenery, because of the change of people, like all of that keeps me intrigued, keeps me going. You know, plus it's also that whole idea, I like the idea of a checklist, checking things off, getting it all done. Now, as far as like being around Al for as long as I have, the big thing that I learned from him, one of the first things I remember when I first started doing pools when I was a kid was the idea was what's in the truck. Especially when, you know, I'm like 10 years old and I'm playing the gopher, he'd tell me go get this, go get that. And it's a matter of just being able to get it done with what's there. And that alone has been invaluable as far as, okay, whether it's a matter of, okay, in general, this is the way that I would do it. However, being able to troubleshoot and look at a problem and realize, it's the same thing like in math class where there's more than just the set expected steps. There's more than one way to do things. So as long as you get the end result, it's not really going to matter. And especially seeing how many times he's been able to innovate and do things different. I mean, especially if you look at our pools in general, he does things that other people don't. The reason why people love the idea of coming to us for a pool to be built is because they do want something different. So based on what he can innovate and what he can come up with, it allows me to do the same thing on the service end, seeing it after so many years, especially. So even if it's, hey, this has to get through the next day or so before I can, because I need to get certain parts from my supplier or something else, and how can I make this work, at least in the meantime, to make sure that things don't get any worse than they are or something like that. By having that experience and being around him, I can also fix things temporarily and not just permanently. And I mean, that's pretty much it, is kind of the whole innovative end.
And get it done with what's on the truck. Mm-hmm. I learned that early on just my history, when I first got started on the service end, I was raw and new in the industry, and I had worked for literally a few months doing pool openings and a little bit of construction work when the previous owner sent me out to do some service work as the grunt. Mm-hmm. And recognized pretty quickly that I had the mechanics, I had the understanding of service. And so then very quickly after that, I was thrown out on my own, go do this thing. And I learned real quick that I couldn't have all the tools as much as I wanted to. And back in those days especially, you had minimum things on the truck. You didn't have racks of stuff. We had very minimal, and I had to learn quickly how to get it done because most of the jobs that I was being sent to at that time were remote. They weren't in the city where you could make a quick trip. We didn't have Home Depots. We didn't have any of those places. If you needed a part, you had to go to the supplier, which there's a couple supply houses in the whole, within 100 miles. So you had to go there and get the part, or you had to innovate. How do I fix something? How do I make this work? What can I do different? What technique? And that's I learned that was something I just had to do because otherwise I never would have gotten anything done. Mm-hmm. I would have always been running back to one of our stores. We had 2 stores, or back to a supplier. At least now you have Home Depot and stuff. But having that mentality, how can I fix this with what I have? How can I do this? I think is incredibly invaluable in all of life. Not just this, but think about if people live that way. I mean, you watch the reality TV shows and there's the bush fix. You got the guy up in the bush he has to use what's on his wagon or his whatever to fix whatever this thing is. And I think that's a skill that's been lost because we don't have people in trades like we used to. We don't have fathers teaching their sons and or daughters in today's day and age a craft and how to do things. Instead, we're just pushing kids out there, having them figured out, and I think we've lost a lot of that.
There's also to be talk about like helicopter parenting of wanting, or what they say, lawnmower parenting or something.
That's the new one.
Where you mow everything down. It's a matter of removing obstacles as opposed to letting the child figure it out for themselves, mm-hmm. or encouraging them to mm-hmm. figure it out and to struggle.
Giving them some guidance, but let them make those mistakes, and we are missing that.
Which, as humorous as that is, that reminds me of that's pretty much how I learned. Same as what you mentioned is it was go to this job and you're like, call me if you need help, and that was it. And it was just okay. Yeah.
Well, and that's because it was my experience. Mm-hmm. Even So because it was so long ago, we didn't even have cell phones to call back. We'd have to use the customer's phone or go to a payphone to call back to the office. And because I grew up that way and I realized I learned that way, even as technology came aboard and we had cell phones by that point in time, it was, you'll figure it out on your own. But if worst case scenario, call me. And you rarely had to call me unless it was something that just you couldn't figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, that's something that I admire the most about you, is you can look at something and take the time to figure it out. That's a rare skill. Most people, when faced with an obstacle like that of something that's not known, would quit and say, I can't do it. Got to call a service guy. Got to call somebody else to come fix this. And that's something, I've thrown you into some crazy stuff on the construction end as well, is here's a massive pipe coming from 800 directions and we have this much room to make this work. And methodically, one after another, those pipes got put together in a way that made sense. And that is a skill, again, that is rare. So you possess that ability in terms of really a rare skill, but then also that skill of figuring it out and then fixing it however you have to with what you have. And those are things that I'm really grateful for, because now I don't have to do those, and I don't have to be day to day doing those types of fixes. And it's been amazing to watch, and I really appreciate that in you.